Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everyone. A post-election, maybe game-changing election, primary election here in southern DMZ.
So
Well, the election was in Wisconsin, but I'm in southern DMZ.
now you are someone who has expressed great animus towards Donald Trump. He is sort of the manifestation of your too dumb to fail premise, your hot new book. I don't know, actually. I'm not sure if we talked about this. If you have, well, you did say earlier that when Rubio was still in, that you should vote for whomever could stop Trump, depending on your state.
Yes.
And so
I am, let's be clear, I am now rooting for Lion Ted Cruz.
right,
That's my candidate.
So really, only Cruz can stop Trump. I guess there's a case to be made that Kasich could be competitive in Pennsylvania. I think there's one poll that suggested that. But generally speaking,
which would be great. It would be great to do that for Kasich to win Pennsylvania. I think that would be terrific. It'd be great for Ted Cruz, actually, in my opinion.
So
for
Cruz
Kasich to win
wins
Pennsylvania.
by a lot. He doesn't.
That sounds like Trump, by the way. That sounds like Trump. Cruz wins by a lot, by the way.
But he did not win a full sweep of the state, and Wisconsin, it's winner take all by congressional district. I think Trump won doing one or two congressional districts.
Well, I think it's like one of those hybrids where the winner of the state gets some X number of delegates,
Right.
And then each congressional district awards, I think, 3 delegates or something. I don't know.
Right. So I can't remember. I saw one of the districts was kind of close. Do you know if he won that second district or not?
I forget how it came out, but Cruz, it was an overwhelming victory for Cruz. He gets the vast majority of the delegates.
But is it still relevant that Trump did well in the western portion of the state? He still showed legs in the rural demographic.
No, I mean I don't think that's surprising. And I mean if you're going to have this sort of winner take most or whatever it's called, where congressional districts, you're going to have congressional districts that have different political cultures. And by the way, I had a piece up at the Daily Caller about Bowling Alone. The I think it was a 2000 book, Bowling Alone. There was a map in that book that shows the parts of the country that have a high social capital. That their culture is social capital, so people join bowling leagues together. And you could basically take that map, and it will almost seems to be a pretty good predictor of places that Trump wins. If there's low social capital, if people do not join bowling leagues, then Trump wins. The areas that have higher social capital, Cruz is winning. So just an interesting tidbit. So counties are different. States have unique peculiarities and congressional districts. It doesn't surprise me that they're not sort of all unanimous in favor of one candidate.
So I see that Trump did win 2 congressional districts. So he got 6 delegates out of 42. So still good delegate haul for Cruz. It seems to make a strong case that Trump will have a hard time winning an outright majority of delegates on the first ballot. But by the same token, Cruz's the breadth of Cruz support may still be limited. You're heading into a lot of Northeast states, which has been where Trump has been strongest. His best state is still Massachusetts. So you're in New York, his home state. You're doing Connecticut, doing Pennsylvania and Delaware and Maryland. This is not where Cruz has done well at all. Maybe.
Right. But you've also got, like you say, Kasich could win Pennsylvania.
Right.
Cruz and Kasich could pick off congressional districts or counties or whatever in New York. I think Cruz is campaigning in Brooklyn tomorrow or today. And then you've got the fact that there are other states that we're going to end with, states like Wyoming and Colorado and Nebraska and South Dakota, Then
Not a
you've
lot,
got the
not a lot of
fact,
delegates there.
no, but then you've got the fact that Cruz in Colorado maybe, but then you've got the fact that Cruz is also quote unquote stealing delegates. So Pennsylvania, for example, the delegates, my understanding is that they're unbound somehow.
That's a loophole primary, and you vote for the individual delegate.
Right. So people might not know who Donald Trump's individual delegates are if he has them on slate, if they have has a slate of them
Well,
running.
before we
I don't
jump
know,
ahead
but
to before we jump ahead to how the convention itself would play out, it still kind of it doesn't feel like to me that the bottom has fallen out of Trump. You're definitely
no,
seeing
I
consolidation.
don't think it needs to.
I'm sorry.
Well, I don't think it needs to fall out. The problem. It's not that Trump has to collapse. It's that he needs to win 50-some% of the delegates left, and he could miss that mark without having a collapse.
Right. I mean, I think it's almost a certainty he misses the mark. He doesn't get an outright majority. But if he's at 90 to 95% of what he would need, and Cruz is trailing by a lot, even if he has a halfway decent final run, does that strengthen? I mean, Trump is already making the case, if you have the most, you have the most. And if I don't get it, my people are going to walk. There could be riots. Roger Stone is out there saying we are collecting the hotel room numbers where the delegates will be at. I mean, they're making it very clear they're not going to walk away from the convention if he comes up a little bit short. They're gonna do a full court press and then some. And so there's obviously this brewing story that Trump's not doing well in the delegate hunt, in the intricacies of these state processes, that the party, he's going to have a lot of disloyal delegates, all that kind of thing.
So like in North Dakota last weekend, Trump was dramatically outmaneuvered by the Cruz forces, and I think there might only be one of the delegates selected at the North Dakota Republican Convention, state convention.
But that's a convention where they are all technically unbound. I mean, no one is assigned to Cruz. Cruz is just arguing that a bunch of those people will vote for when they get there.
Then you've got Tennessee, where this happened in Louisiana. This happened in Tennessee. Had a state convention the other week, and there were, I think, 14 delegates that they're not voted on, but the state GOP gets to assign them, and apparently Trump is not getting the delegates he wanted. I think that they're bound to vote for Trump on the first two ballots, but a third ballot that could be 14 or so delegates that there'd be attrition from Trump when they're unbound if it goes to three ballots. So I mean, I think Cruz is really outmaneuvering Trump in the states. Aside from the fact that he won Wisconsin, sort of outright yesterday.
My question to you is, and maybe you're not the best position to answer it being inside D.C., because maybe this comes down to more what individual delegates believe, and they're scattered across the country. But I think Washington Republican people play a role here. What is the reservoir of courage being built up to block Trump at the convention if he is a little bit short? I mean, if he has 95% of the delegates, if you're hell bent on stopping him, you can. Obviously, there are chess pieces in place to do it, but you have to have the gumption to actually do it in the face of potential rioting, having your door being pounded on in the middle of the night, being blitzed by phone calls and emails and texts and all that. Is there an appetite to do it that is rising, at least from where you sit, or is it still kind of amorphous if the party is really willing to go to the mat over it?
I think that they will. I mean, I think it depends who the delegates are. Like, I don't buy that people are going to be intimidated. My guess is most of these delegates are kind of party regulars who are much more predisposed to favor Cruz over Trump. My gut, if I had to if I had to bet today, I think I would say that if Trump doesn't win in the first ballot, that he doesn't win. That Cruz would emerge. That's my gut. It's been a weird year. We've been wrong. I can say I've been wrong about a lot of stuff that has to do with Trump specifically. By the way, I want to get into why the pundits usually do get it right, including Wisconsin being a prime example.
But to your point there, I mean, I agree with you that if Trump can't get first ballot, that becomes a lot harder for him. But he could be, 90-95% of the way there and win on the first ballot. He could pick up those unbound delegates.
Absolutely. That's why I didn't say if he doesn't get 1237, if he doesn't clinch it before the convention, I say if he doesn't get it on the first ballot, if it goes to a second ballot, then I think I bet on Cruz at that point.
So if you're at that point, okay, so Trump doesn't get on the first ballot. I mean, Trump's argument is that, I have a plurality. I have the most. I did better than Cruz. I did better than Kasich. So how could you, because, the technical argument, and by the way, there is an RNC video they put out called Convention Facts where they stress you have to have a majority. Minority isn't good enough. And there's a Karl Rove Wall Street Journal column making that same point. That they're pushing back on the Trump argument that a plurality should be good enough. They're saying no. That's not the rules. Don't say that. The rules say you need a majority. Short of a majority, you don't have it, and that is correct. But the Republican voters don't know that or believe that yet, based on a Bloomberg poll that came out last week.
But the delegates do. The delegates will know that.
But the delegates might feel very sensitive to what opinion back home is. So if they feel like everyone back in my town believes Trump deserves this because he has the most, that might scare them.
But
and
these
on top
delegates,
of
that's why I say it matters who they are. I mean, if they're elites in their state, like I'll give you an example. Like in North Dakota. Now, North Dakota is not a. I mean, North Dakota is a unique state, but when I looked at the delegate list of delegates that were elected, I knew at least half the names. These are people who are part of the state aristocracy, the state establishment. They were delegates 15 years ago, and they're not going to all of a sudden be moved by the fact that most people in most sort of regular folks in Grand Forks may be like Donald Trump. Like, they run in different circles, and they're in a bubble to a certain degree. So, I mean, you can't really extrapolate that and say that all delegates are like that. But I do think that a lot of these delegates are party regulars. They're people who are who go to political conventions, attend political meetings. This isn't their first rodeo necessarily, so I don't know if they're going to be as susceptible to that kind of peer pressure from their community.
So if they're going to be sticklers for the rules, you need a majority. It's still a big jump to say if Trump doesn't have a majority, he can't be it. Therefore, I'm going to go with the candidate who has fewer delegates than he does, who did worse than him in the primaries. I mean, doesn't that just feed a perspective for a Trump walkout or riot? I mean, you have a better case to make bringing in a Paul Ryan, who you can at least the Republican primary electorate didn't reject him. They didn't say outright he's not good enough. He just didn't play, and he comes in with a clean slate.
I would disagree with that. I would say that I mean, I understand the rationale, but I don't buy that because, number one, the numbers are going to start moving. It's about winning delegates, and on the second ballot, all of a sudden now, maybe Cruz has 900 delegates or 1,000 delegates or something on the second ballot. So, I mean, these things are moving. They're moving targets, and then all of a sudden it becomes plausible that Cruz could be the nominee. But the big reason is, I think that, okay, you want to talk about a delegate needing to have guts and hoping that they can get out of Cleveland alive without the city burning down. If you, as a delegate, go with Paul Ryan, then it gets ugly. Then the grassroots are enraged and outraged. I think Cruz would be a much more palatable alternative if you're a delegate, a compromise candidate. He's someone who ran, who gained momentum at the end, as he appears that he's probably going to be doing, who emerged as the sort of consensus candidate. He and I think that he's also an outsider. It wouldn't be perceived that Trump is trying to set up Ted Cruz now as the establishment candidate, a Trojan horse. But that's a really hard sell. Most establishment people hate Ted Cruz, and he's a consummate outsider. Well, again, we could argue about that, but he has the grassroots bona fides that I think would prevent the narrative from getting out of hand.
But how much does the establishment still hate him? They're obviously puffing him up now because they also hate Trump. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're loyal to Cruz throughout the entirety of the convention process. They can say, you've done your job, you blocked Trump, great. Now let's go to Ryan or go to Mitt Romney or go to someone else who swoops in from above.
Well, my sense is that, yes, if Lindsey Graham were running the show and if he had carte blanche authority to do whatever he wants, Lindsey Graham might well conceive an idea whereby everybody backs Ted Cruz now and then abandons him at a convention on the third ballot. But this is not being driven. There are no brokers to broker a deal like that. There is no establishment in the sense that there are anybody calling the shots or anybody who has the imprimatur or the gravitas to sort of force their way. So it's going to be more organic. Now, again, these delegates, in my opinion, are by and large going to be party regulars. These are going to be people who are, establishment Republican types by and large. There will be exceptions, of course. But I think that means that they're sort of going to behave in a way that is not top-down driven, but that is organic and spontaneous. And I think that they now will view Ted Cruz as the best possible alternative, who is more acceptable than Trump, who looks better in comparison to Trump, but is also somebody that the grassroots would accept and would not revolt over. That's my take. I could be totally wrong about that.
So if you were putting money on this today, I'm not going to hold you to this forever, but you're leading. It sounds like that the nominee is going to be Ted Cruz.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, that is right. That is right.
Well, that does speak to the value of punditry, but I want to end with that. Let's pick up the Democratic side of the coin before we get over there. So Bernie wins Wisconsin, wins it by 13. He has now won, I believe, 6 of the last 7 contests, but he nets, I believe it is 10 delegates out of Wisconsin. Hillary's pledged delegate lead is still over 200 there, and you're going into a number of states which are not really intrinsically Bernie's turf. I wrote a piece for Politico last week, which was titled "How Bernie Can Win, but He's Not Going to Like It," which laid out, so to actually overtake her, the pledged delegates would mean.
I think we did talk about this last week, by the way.
Did we?
Bill. I think we did, but it bears repeating after Bernie wins Wisconsin. It's even more relevant than it was when you wrote that piece. You look at the Wisconsin electorate. The big part of that Politico piece was the generation gap. That Bernie's winning 71% of the under 30 crowd. Hillary's winning 65% of the 30 and over crowd. Now Wisconsin, Bernie did better across the board, being a very white and very liberal state. But Wisconsin was 42% of the Wisconsin electorate was under the age of 45, which is similar to what Michigan was. Michigan, it was actually a little bit higher. It's 45% of the electorate was under 45. Compare that with Ohio and Illinois, other Midwest states, where it was about 38%. And Missouri, which was a hair-thin win for Hillary, that it was 41%. So the younger the electorate,
the better Bernie does. And we only have, there are only, Bernie has won 5 primary states. The vast majority of his wins are caucus states. 2 of his primary wins are Vermont and New Hampshire. A third is Oklahoma, which has a lot of kind of fake Democrats who are really Republicans on a national basis, and probably those types of folks are kind of anti-Hillary now, and they vote for Bernie. So you have 2 kind of blue Midwest states that Bernie has won, Wisconsin and Michigan, where that youth vote was high, and the other kind of similar states, Ohio, Missouri, Illinois, Hillary won, where the electorate was older. So I don't believe that Bernie. I mean, the question is, does he have momentum or not? He's had a streak, so that does that mean that Hillary's fizzling and Bernie's on the rise? Well, I think you could only make that case if he was winning in states that were not naturally his turf, and that's not what's happening. He's winning in the caucus states, which he's always been good at, and Wisconsin is similar to more so than Michigan, even more liberal, even whiter, and also young. So now you're heading into New York, which in 2008.
Right, let me stop you there real quick though before you get to New York.
Yeah.
Glenn Greenwald, he tweets, the last 7 states, Idaho, Sanders wins 78%. Utah, Sanders 79.3%. Arizona, Hillary wins 56%. Alaska, Sanders 81.6%. Hawaii, Sanders 68.8%. Washington, Sanders 72.7%. Wisconsin, Sanders 56.5%. So 6 out of the last 7 states, Bernie wins, probably averaging about 70%.
Yeah, but those are almost all caucus states with very low turnout, very homogeneous population, so that exaggerates the effects. Hillary has won states on his turf. She's won Massachusetts. She's won Ohio. Bernie can't say he's picked off something that was likely to be in her camp based on the demographics. She has won white voters in Ohio. He has not won black voters anywhere. So he's now going into places where if he actually wants to run the table and overtake her and pledge delegates, which would mean winning 15 of the next 17 states, often by significant margins, he can't do it on his base alone. He has to go beyond that. And I don't think he is inclined to alter his style of campaigning to do that. And so, because to do that would mean having a campaign message that appeals to older voters. I mean, I think it's less about race than it is about age. The older voter is more accepting of a pragmatic approach to politics vis-a-vis a younger voter. That's true generally. I think it's even more so now because an older voter has a relationship with the Clintons going back to 1992 when they saved them from the political abyss, and a younger voter has no connection to that. They were baptized by the market crash, and their introduction to the Clintons was Wall Street deregulation. So they're on different pages as far as what it means to be a Clinton. And what works for Bernie now with that younger crowd just doesn't fly with an older crowd, by and large. So that's why I'm skeptical. The Glenn Greenwald momentum argument doesn't take into account the kind of states that are in that streak he has. That's more of a fluke of the calendar than actual momentum.
All right. Fair enough.
So do you want to shift on to punditry, or do you have something else to say about how do you think Hillary's going to do in these upcoming states?
No, I'll go to punditry real quick. Shouldn't take long. I wrote a piece today at the Daily Caller because, Wisconsin's an example of where the pundits, the last couple of weeks pretty much knew that Ted Cruz was going to win, and guess what he did? And no one ever really remembers that. No one, when the chef gets your order correct, nobody sends compliments. It's only complaining when you get the order wrong, and we just don't notice. And I think there was a lot of, essentially the way I think it works, just looking at my own record, where I predicted almost, a week or two out, I would be on CNN and they would ask me who was going to win Iowa, who's going to win, New Hampshire, who's going to come in second, I was pretty much always right. And so I think it's like weather forecasting. The short term prognostication it's much better than the long term forecast. And I was listening to the Bill Simmons podcast a couple weeks ago, and somebody said this, and it stuck with me. You wouldn't expect a sports columnist to today predict who's going to win the Super Bowl next year. And if they said, well, I think the Patriots are going to win next year, and they don't, nobody would say, well, Mike Lupica doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, because, maybe Tom Brady got injured or, things happen. And I'm an Orioles fan. And in 2014, hardly anybody predicted they would win the American League East. And in fact, Sports Illustrated, not a single one of their commentators or writers predicted it. And yet they did. But nobody would say, well, they don't know what they're doing, they shouldn't be a sports commentator. Because they play 162 games a year, and all sorts of things could happen during the course of the year. And there's so many variables. So I only bring it up because, not that I'm thin-skinned or that but every once in a while I still see people saying, the political commentators didn't see Donald Trump coming, so why should we listen to any of them? And I think that's kind of a BS thing, sort of argument. Look, in my book, Too Dumb to Fail, I went after the Dick Morris and others who are just wildly wrong and like were never held accountable for all their wrong predictions. But having said that, I think that, just like a sports columnist, you can't expect them to predict who's going to win the Super Bowl next year. But, they're going to see patterns and trends, and they're going to teach me things that I don't know, and it's going to enrich my experience. And throughout the season, they're going to pick up on things and see things, and they're going to get better. By week 10 or week 5, I would even say by week 5, most sports analysts are just to get better at calling football games, and knowing what teams are going to win. You still don't know. You still don't always know. So anyway, that's me sort of on a rant here about something that I keep seeing pop up, and I just think it's unrealistic to expect political pundits and commentators to see like Donald Trump coming a year in advance or anything like that.
Well, I think what you said about the point of punditry is about learning things and try to understand trends and things of that nature. That the actual prognostication is for entertainment purposes only. It's not really what the point is, even though you and I play that game, to our detriment way too often. But when I wrote, the infamous, it's going to be Hillary versus Jeb, the value of that piece was not just to show that I can see into the future. It was to try to understand what happens inside the electorates. And the argument was that on the Republican side, that the pattern of behavior is that the right flank doesn't unify and the establishment does. And that's why we had McCain and Romney and Dole, and there's no reason that would be different this year. Even today, even as bizarre as this race is, so what was wrong about that piece fundamentally was that the establishment is not unified and still isn't unified. However, as you suggest, it could well unify by convention time. It still might have more unity in its back pocket than the Trump forces have. Once the rubber really hits the road.
Right.
You really don't have. Trump has unified more than I would have expected him to. I would not have expected him to hold 35% and up this deep into the race. So again, not patting myself on the back here, but he still lacks actual unity of the party, which is why he's not going to get a majority most likely.
4 or 5 years ago at theweek.com, I wrote a piece about something like the working class epidemic of manufacturing, something like that. I can't think of the exact title, but basically it was about this problem that working class whites are. I've written a lot over the years about this sort of problem that working class whites are facing and how that there was an opening for a populist candidate who could speak to them. I wrote a piece about a year or so ago. It was about Mike Huckabee, actually, but I've written this about Huckabee and Santorum, that there's this real niche, this opening, there's an underserved market of working class white populists out there that nobody was tapping into, and that Huckabee and Santorum flirted with but never could close the deal with. I wrote a book, that came out January 26th, that I started writing 2 years ago, about the Republican Party coming apart and this sort of populist strain pulling it apart. So, I mean, I saw the larger trends coming. And then more specifically, as I said, I basically got New Hampshire right, Iowa right. And within the Republican Party, my predictions on the Democratic side are, I don't even go there. But on the Republican side, I was pretty much right. So basically, my long range forecast in terms of the environment was pretty much spot on. My very short range, like a week or so out, there's a snowstorm coming, was pretty much dead on. But I never saw Trump. I completely underestimated Trump as the person who would embody this and animate this this anger and frustration. I just totally missed the boat on that. So that's just my own personal.
I'm sorry. Go finish up.
So that's just one example. But my point would be, I still think and nobody should put their trust in any one, just like weather forecasts, you have separate models that you look at and that you track. But I would say that somebody who's been reading me, if they're looking for really long range, like where's the country going? Where's the Republican Party going? I think I have a pretty good track record on that. And somebody who wants to know, okay, there's a primary 10 days from now, who's going to win? I think I had a pretty good track record of that on the Republican side as well. So I would think that there would be a benefit if somebody who's interested in sort of learning about what's going on in politics, that they would certainly gain something from reading my writing or listening to me talk. But I think that there is some people are suggesting it's an indictment, a pox on all your houses, that basically every political commentator got Trump wrong, and therefore it's a disqualifier. You don't know what you're talking about. And I think that we don't do that in any other, we don't do that with weather forecasting. We don't do that with sports columnists. I do get a sense that there's a sense to delegitimize political punditry. And look, let's be honest. Some political pundits beclown themselves and deserve this bad reputation. And that makes it even harder on all the rest of us. So we're legitimately trying to get things right, but we see through a glass darkly.
Well, in an ideal world, when we all get things wrong sometimes, especially when you're taking the risk of trying to be clairvoyant. But if you can acknowledge when you got something wrong and explain what you've learned, you hopefully in that process can still be illuminating. I don't have a weekly column, so when I get something wrong, I don't necessarily have the perch to say to the people who read the first piece, here's what I got wrong, so I'm not a total idiot, and maybe I can still teach you something about something else. But in the case of Hillary and Bernie, I'd written a number of pieces that basically said Hillary was going to not have too much trouble, and she still, in all likelihood, it will be the nominee, so I'm not completely off base. But I definitely, my commentaries of 2015 missed this generation gap. I was seeing in the polling not a lot of antipathy towards Hillary, and so I assumed that bond with the Clintons, to whatever extent they might have frayed in 2008, had been restored by 2012 in her Secretary of State tenure, and she was in decent shape. And what I did not pick up on, and there wasn't much data to use, was that under 30 crowd just had a totally different view on things and was very open to an anti-Clinton populist candidate in far greater numbers than older voters are. But once I saw that, so if you look at what I wrote after Iowa and New Hampshire, I wrote that Bernie's in very good shape to take this to the convention, have a lot of delegates to to work with on the floor, even though I still wasn't saying he was going to win. I wasn't going that far, but I had the opportunity to recalibrate my thinking based on new information, and I shared that. It would be nice to be able to do that all the time, but we can't all have weekly columns at the New York Times where you have that opportunity. But that's what I think an honest pundit tries to do. Break down the information he or she has as the best he or she can, and when new information comes their way, adjust accordingly and explain themselves.
Yeah, David Brooks has written, and by the way, I mean, I think it bears. There are people who are like unqualified people who go on cable news and argue and yell. So like they're different. Like I don't know what a pundit is or what a commentator is, and like I think like some are more serious than others, and you have to sort of like, but the point here is that even really sort of diligent and sincere, observers and commentators, you can't expect them to sort of predict who's going to be the nominee or something a year in advance. It just doesn't work that way. Just like you wouldn't expect, a sports columnist to do that in baseball. But to your point, Bill, David Brooks has actually been doing some introspection and self-flagellation, one might even say, at the New York Times. And he had a column the other week saying that, suggesting he may even sort of have to go like on a listening tour and like reevaluate the way he looks at the world and that, the Trump phenomenon has changed things. I have to say, I did a podcast last week with Jamie Kirchick about the alt-right. I don't know if you're familiar with this alternative right movement.
Not much.
It's a weird, it's sort of an umbrella term, and it's basically a group of people who are like online gamers, mostly male techies, white nationalists, gamers, and sort of like men's rights advocates is sort of how I would loosely describe these people.
Sounds delightful.
And it's really weird. I heard Kevin Williamson from National Review talking about this recently on a podcast. I think it was a Ricochet podcast too. And I'm in the same boat with him. I mean, the right and the left both have their sort of dark underbelly that we don't want to talk about. But I think I think that I sort of naively thought that the fringe elements on the right were a pretty small minority, and I think they're bigger. I think there are more of them than I thought there were. Now, Eric Erickson, I think it's called the Resurgence, is arguing now that some of Trump's people might be Russians and paid actors and sort of trolls and
people that are voting.
Sock puppet. No, like his online support and some of his early rallies and stuff like that. You should go read the piece. But this is mostly an online phenomenon. But
I mean,
anyway, the point
even is true for Trump. He still got the votes, so you can't call the whole thing phony.
No, I agree. But my point here being that online, I've seen, and again, it's hard to say how big this movement actually is because it could be magnified by sort of a Potemkin village on the internet where it seems larger than it is. But there's a movement, a sort of. There are these hashtags. There's one called "White Girls Are Magic," and I've seen some of these videos that they put out, and these are attractive women that are basically saying like, other groups stick together. Why shouldn't white women are raped at a disproportionate rate? It's very tied into the Trump movement as well, and. Basically, the point here is that I was kind of blindsided by this. I assumed that of course we're going to have problems in America going forward, but I've always assumed that the trend would be toward, a pluralistic society, and that really the problem would be fighting back liberalism and leftism. And I never thought we would go backwards in terms of race, and that was probably naive of me. That was probably naive of me.
But I wouldn't argue that we are going backwards. I mean, I think this is evidence of backlash. and we shouldn't be surprised when a degree of backlash occurs. But let's not forget, Trump's getting shellacked in general election polls. To the extent he's consolidating this white nationalist alt-right, I mean, it's not propelling him to the presidency. It's boxing him into a completely untenable political position. So this is why that piece of rope in the New Republic, the case of shutting down the Republican Party. I mean, to the extent that the party is reliant on those votes, you got to cut those guys loose.
I think it is being mainstreamed. I am seeing people write things that I would deem to be anti-Semitic, that are people who, I mean, I'm not saying they're within the mainstream but they're not completely fringe elements either. I feel like, and again, something is afoot, something weird is happening out there, and
well, Trump's legitimized.
That's just one example.
Trump legitimizes a lot of hate, and when it's
but this is an example
it's more of a rise to the surface now.
To broaden it out is how it's my job to sort of be in touch with things, and I think I did not see that coming to the degree that it is, and I think that. I mean, the good thing is I asked Jamie Kirchick, who's like a decade younger than me, and he's like, I had no idea. He was like stunned as well that the way things are playing out. So it's not an age thing per se, but it's part of our job is to sort of, know what's happening. And even David Brooks, I say even because on one hand you would assume a columnist for the New York Times needs to be at the top of his game, but on the other hand, that's a bubble in and of itself. But Brooks is basically saying, I need to reevaluate everything I think about politics. And that's a big admission.
Well, why don't we leave it on that note? Anything you need to plug before we head out?
Yeah, check out the podcast. Like I say, I just had Jamie Kirchick on talking about his column about the alt-right at National Review, and then I had Tom Lobianco on, who's a CNN reporter who was actually at the Republican convention in North Dakota. He's going to be either at or going to the convention in Michigan, and we had a pretty in-depth full discussion. If you're a geek and you are very interested in the delegate race and the convention rules, then you should listen to that podcast. Matt Lewis and the News on iTunes.
And it's not up yet, but I'm working on my second installment of the Talk Me Down podcast, which will be up at liberaloasis.com hopefully shortly, talking about the division on the Democratic side. And outside of that, I also, in the wake of my Al Franken for Vice President Politico piece, I have launched alfrankenvpwatch.com, along with a Twitter feed and a Facebook feed. So if you get any Al Franken VP tips, all the sources out there, if you see something on TV, you hear something on the street, feed it to me. We'll get it up on the site.
Have you started the draft Al Franken for VP?
This is Al Franken VP Watch. I'm merely chronicling the developments. This is not advocacy, not a draft site. Just showing what speculation and conversation is happening out in the universe.
All right, my friend. Another award-winning show. So thank you all for watching, listening, and check us out on Twitter at DMZ Show. And check back in with us next week.